Welcome to You Can't Get to Heaven in a Miniskirt. My name is Sarah.
And my name is Jessica.
And you can find us at, I'm going to always fuck this up. You can find us at Instagram at Heaven in a Miniskirt, or you can find us at heaveninaminiskirt.com.
And if you would like to support the show, we are on Patreon and Apple Podcasts. Our bonus episodes are on there. You can go to patreon.com/heaveninaminiskirt, or you can subscribe through Apple Podcasts. And if you don't want to support us with your money, we would love if you could rate and review us on whatever platform you're using. It makes a huge difference. And it makes a big difference in our egos too. So
yeah, we love hearing from you. And that's why we do it because we've been in this space for a while now, and it's really hard deconstructing. It impacts literally every part of your life. And that is why we do it. And there's just infinite things we can talk about. And so today this was an episode where we had a couple guests on. We just finished recording with them, Julia and Jeremiah, and they are the Sexvangelicals. They're both sex therapists and former evangelicals who have deconstructed. And so we had some really interesting conversations around compulsory heterosexuality, because Julia is also queer as well. And
we talked about their deconstruction testimonies, but most importantly, kind of just talked about the things that they come across in their work as certified sex therapists. And it was really fascinating. So if you are a victim, or if you're interested in purity culture, or just kind of hearing some things around what sex therapy is all about, I found it fascinating. I find it really liberating when you get to talk to people who do this for their lives and they're just like, no big deal. Like, we talk about sex and sex is fine. And even though I have been out of Christianity for so long and we have talked about purity culture so much, I am still affected by it all the time. And so it's always refreshing to have these conversations. And I hope it's refreshing for you guys to hear these conversations. And we had a lot of fun.
And happy Pride.
Happy Pride, although it is now July.
It's funny, but my area celebrates Pride in July.
That's actually, I Googled it. That's all of Canada.
All of Canada.
So I was like, we talked a couple podcast episodes ago, like, what are you going to do for Pride? And I was like, oh, I'll see what's going on in Vancouver. And it's all in July. They'll probably have something over where I'm living, or we'll go into the city.
We're going to see each other next month. That's always fun when we get to see each other.
I know. So we're going to see each other next month and we'll post all about it.
Maybe do a Q&A.
I won't be drinking this time because I'm pregnant. You know what's crazy though, is that, by the way, listeners, I am pregnant, and we only said it on a bonus episode.
Oh, I forgot about
we
that.
announced it on a bonus episode, and then on our last episode, we just put it out there, and I didn't realize that we haven't actually told the listeners. So I'm pregnant and I'm due in November, and when I have the baby, we will see what that's going to look like for the pod. And if we have to take a break, it'll be a short break. Either way, we're here for a few months. We have a few good episodes coming up, including this one, and we hope you guys enjoy. So take a listen to our conversations with Julia and Jeremiah, and go follow them on Instagram at Sexvangelicals, and enjoy.
Bye.
Bye. Today we have amazing guests. We have Julia and Jeremiah, who call themselves the Sexvangelicals. And we're going to be talking about purity culture, which is exciting because Sarah and I haven't talked about purity culture in a minute.
And this is kind of one of the things why we started the podcast.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice to recenter a little bit.
Come back to our roots.
Yeah.
Come back to our roots of having trauma. It's great.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? I know that's a big question, but I know you each have your own deconstruction stories and how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah. Go for it, Julia.
Okay. Is there anything in particular you're looking for, or where the spirit leads?
Just your deconstruction testimony is more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me get my piano and let me play some arpeggios
Yes.
really lightly.
Well, testimony brings me back to my Christian camp, which was one of 3 important structures in my life. So I grew up in the woods of Western Massachusetts, and the 3 communities that defined my childhood and adolescence were my church, which was an independent fundamentalist Baptist church, and my Christian school and my Christian camp. My Christian school was essentially a homeschooling co-op We did not have a real school building. We rented from an apartment building, which we called the Green Building. I am pretty sure in retrospect that it was a drug house. So
Oh my
people
God.
have an idea of what New England private schools are. That was not my private school. So my community was really insular. I did not choose my friends, and not all of it was bad. I have some really fond memories from my childhood. And in retrospect, I also don't think I realized how sad and anxious I was until leaving. I, like many folks, went to a Christian college. That was my choice. It was not necessarily expected of me. I was very entrenched in the Christian system. So, for lack of a better way to say it, I drank the Kool-Aid. I was swimming in the Kool-Aid, loved the Kool-Aid, showering in the Kool-Aid,
Yeah.
all the Kool-Aid. So a Christian college was actually really important to me. And that is where I started my deconstruction journey. So I think about deconstruction like a Jenga tower. So going to Christian school and majoring in social work and finding probably the most liberal pocket of a Christian university was what opened my eyes to the fact that some Christians could vote for a Democrat. That was mind-blowing to me. Seriously mind-blowing.
Wow.
And maybe hell wasn't real. And perhaps most shocking of all, universalists exist at Christian schools, and they are not just the heathens who go to the Unitarian churches. So really, my deconstruction journey was primarily started in an intellectual kind of way.
Was Rob Bell involved in any way, shape, or form?
Good question.
Tangentially, because I went to Calvin College, now Calvin University, and Rob Bell was a pastor at a church in Grand Rapids. It was not a church that I went to, but he was still within the Christian faith at that point. So we were Christians together in Grand Rapids for a hot minute. We didn't know each other. But the deconstruction journey became more personal after I got married. So I got married at the mature age of 22.
Checks out.
I was older than many of my peers, and I received lots of encouragement and support around it. People loved my ex-husband and I together. They would tell us how mature we were, what a great couple we were. And I only ever wish him the best. He is a phenomenal human being. And we were completely set up to fail, as many folks within evangelical types of communities. And although I certainly take accountability and responsibility for what I wish I had done differently, what I wish I had done better in my marriage, a large part of, I don't want to say failure because I don't think relationships ending are actually failures, but a large part of the relationship ending was the fact that we didn't have good models for relationships, and we certainly had no sexual health education. So my honeymoon was actually a terrible experience. The full spill of goods around honeymoon sex was quite devastating. And now I can look back on that with a lot of humor. So you can laugh, I can laugh. At the time, I cried every single day, and I was so disillusioned. And I don't even think sad actually is a good enough word for it, but I didn't know what was happening. I just knew that my world crumbled after I got married. So eventually I did get divorced, but I became a client in sex therapy with my ex-husband before I got divorced and before I became a sex therapist. So that's the high level bird's eye view. Feel free to ask me questions later, but I don't want to monopolize your show.
Wow. I'm just curious, was it a Christian sex therapist that you saw at that point?
No. And I'm quite glad for that. God bless Nancy McGrath in Boston. I still reflect on what I learned in therapy with her. I think that has made me a better person, a better therapist, a better partner. So I know that some folks practice sexual health within Christian kinds of circles, and some are doing good work, and some folks are doing some really terrible work around sexual health in Christian spaces. primarily like the non-licensed therapists who are pastoral counselors, but pastoral counselors aren't actually counselors.
Right.
And that's a whole.
And that's before we get to
ethical
biblical
dilemma.
counselors and just
Yeah, it's like not having a code of ethics, maybe not having mandatory reporting laws.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Should we move on to Jeremiah and then we'll come back because like there's so much here that I'm like, this is all I want to talk about.
Great.
So Jeremiah, tell us your story.
Yeah.
Your testimony.
Yes.
And now I'll play.
Yeah, your turn to play the arpeggios. Like do whatever you want with the
I'll
keyboard.
dim the light.
Just make it hyper spiritual. So I grew up in a denomination called the Church of Christ.
I've been to one. I went on a mission trip with the Church of Christ. I went on a dental mission trip to Jamaica,
Oh.
2005.
So those of you
Yeah.
that are really into Churches of Christ would know how ridiculous my comments about bringing a piano out and playing arpeggios are, because Churches of Christ play a cappella music and they're staunch about it.
What?
Yeah, and you, if you're not Baptist, you're going to hell.
Well, and that's exactly it, right? Because the Church of Christ is plays this really weird role in purity culture.
Yeah.
It's part of the evangelical community.
They're fundamentalists, though. They make Baptists look chill.
Oh, totally. But this is the psychology in the Churches of Christ, is that whatever the Baptists are doing, Churches of Christ aren't going to do. So in some ways, that actually, with the exception of church camp, and my church camp played into like the worst parts of purity culture as well, but like I missed a lot of the worst parts of purity culture. Like our church didn't participate in purity rings. We didn't do the purity pledges, anything like that, because that's what the Baptists did. And so
Oh my God.
the hubris of the Church of Christ spared me from a lot of the sex shaming, at least until I got until college. However, it did not spare me from hyper levels of perfectionism. The craziness, the fundamentalism that you're referring to kind of plays out in these like performance elements of like getting everything right. On Easter weekend, we didn't have an Easter pageant. We had leadership training for Christ.
No, God.
LTC is this
As a teenager, correct?
as a teenager, yeah, as a child, yeah, is this thing. It was I grew up in Dallas, so it was always at the DFW airport.
At the airport.
Yeah, so I grew up poor as well. So I didn't have the money to do like nights at like the Anatole or whatever the fancy hotel was. But anywho, for 3 days there were these competitions around like puppet shows and dramas and Bible reading and song leading, and you would do these performances and you would get rated gold, silver, bronze. And that's very much the ethos of the Church of Christ. Like, know all the things, make sure that you get it perfect, and then live that out in whatever ways you can. Largely in cognitive ways, often in behavioral ways as well. So that's kind of where I grew up. I missed the private school thing, and I went to public schools.
You mean the homeschooling thing?
Yeah, I was gonna say
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like a private school.
Private school.
And how about for college? Did you go to a Christian college?
I did. I went to Abilene Christian, and that was an interesting experience. I got like plugged in.
Plugged in is such an evangelical term.
Oh, it's so totally
Tell
is.
them the name of your worship band.
We're doing life together.
We're doing life together. Yeah, totally.
What was the name of your worship band? Now I want to know.
Yeah.
Well, so again, a cappella music. So worship band is a little strong.
Okay, acapella. Like, are you like harmonizing? Is it,
Oh, yeah, totally.
is it like
totally.
is it like pitch perfect? Like,
Oh, yeah, it's very much like Pitch Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If the Church of Christ could let go of the legalistic bullshit, a cappella worship is actually really cool to be a part of, and a cappella music in general. But when you throw the legalistic bullshit on top of it, it's super obnoxious and people want to lead it. So, anywho, my worship group was called Come As You Are, which actually I stole from Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. I thought I was being super edgy. I'm going to bring in grunge music into my Church of Christ a little. And then only like 10 years later, when I started studying sex therapy, did the title of that group carry an extra meaning. And so that gets to sex. And so I met my ex. My ex and I got married at the not so young, but terribly young age at 24.
I mean, that's
Okay.
geriatric for some Christians.
It really was. It really was.
Seriously,
Yeah.
you were elderly.
So I started dating this woman sophomore year. I'm 19. And there's physical experiences, there's kind of pseudo-sexual experiences. And then pretty early into the relationship, we would have some sort of sexual experience, always with clothes on, because we have to be virgins. And I would orgasm, she would orgasm, and then she would begin to shake. and she would begin to cry. It was very much like, I'm 19, I'm 20, I have no idea what the hell's going on. I'm just like holding on for dear life. And she would start apologizing. Occasionally she'd get mad at me. Mostly it was apologizing. And we would like compose ourselves in some sort of a way. And then that would be the end of the night. We would leave and go to our separate homes. So that happened easily 40 times over the course of 4 years worth of dating.
I'm sure everything was fixed as soon as you signed the marriage certificate.
Absolutely. Oh, totally. No problems whatsoever. So we got married. The honeymoon sex was actually pretty good. The first, I'd say probably 6 to 8 weeks of sexual experiences were, they were net neutral looking back.
Net neutral. Okay.
But about 2 to 3 months in, the criticism towards me started. She started saying things like all that you want is sex. You never want to do anything else, which is interesting because but now doing sex therapy, talking about sex therapy, I actually think about sex probably less than the average person. But that experience kind of combined with the experiences, the panic attacks that I didn't know were panic attacks at the time. So whenever I would initiate a conversation about sex, the panic attacks would come back, some variation of anxiety, either some manifestation of panic or some sort of really harsh push away. And so sexuality became really stealth. And in order to kind of move into it, we kind of figured out some sort of a process for having sex. I didn't really talk about it. And in this time before this, I had studied to be a relational therapist. Marriage and family therapy is my background. And so that was a kind of a macro deconstruction, understanding systems, understanding social construction, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really begin to kind of get out until I began studying sex therapy. And so I took a program. Julia and I are both certified sex therapists through the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, which is the nationwide kind of the top group for sex therapists. And the first class that we had, I learned about consent and had a conversation with adults about consent for the first time and thought, oh, and I get home and my it's like, how'd it go? And I'm white as a ghost because I'm like, oh, fuck. I have completely screwed this up. We haven't talked about it. I think I've raped you along the way. All this shame kind of came out on my end. And unfortunately, we were still never able to find ways to talk about sexuality. So I mentioned I got more into a sex therapy program. This is actually my second podcast. I started another podcast with a colleague of mine, kind of talking about the sex therapy process, what we were learning. And yeah, the gap, the divide in the deconstruction process was too much. The more that I wanted to talk about sexuality, I mentioned couples therapy. She resisted. She wouldn't do it. And the panic attack started to come back. And eventually the relationship couldn't withstand itself anymore. So I got divorced as well. The divorce was pretty ugly, sadly. It also came in the heels of being fired from a church that I had worked at for about 5 years, also in conjunction with sexuality and being the person who talked about sex too much. And yeah, so deconstruction for me also came with other really important structures in my life kind of crumbling.
How many years after you got married did this happen?
About 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And when do your guys' lives intersect?
Around that time, actually.
At the brink of our divorces.
Yeah.
There's something therapeutic about being able to mutually go through divorces, to be able to talk to somebody else about it.
That's true. The experience, I think, for many folks getting divorced in or outside of religious systems is isolating and deeply painful because divorce is so common. I think culturally and socially, we forget that research shows that divorce is as significant of a life stressor as the death of a family member.
Right.
And for folks getting divorced in religious systems, they also experience overt, covert, explicit, or implicit shaming. So that was very hard for me. And actually, the shame from religious systems in some ways was more devastating than the loss of the relationship. And the loss of the relationship was very painful. So that speaks to how awful many Christian communities can be when folks divorce. So knowing that someone else was in a similar situation was comforting because I had very few people in my life who could understand that.
And I think that you kind of alluded to this, but also the loss of community that comes with that as well. Like when I got fired from a church, I had one person reach out to me. A church of 50 people I had been running for 4 or 5 years.
And people that you would have seen multiple times a week that
Absolutely.
you would have constantly been in communication with, just nothing.
That's right.
Crickets.
I reached out to a couple of folks that kind of kept a mutual bond for, I don't know, 6 to 9 months following that. But like really, like I was on my own. When I got divorced, Julia, I had you, and I moved into a house in Dorchester with 2 30-year-olds who were amazing people and also super frat boys.
And how did the two of you meet?
Through work.
Through work, okay.
We actually had the same supervisor in our sex therapy training. And he
cool.
had given Julia my information regarding a different project. And we connected around that and continued to talk about our shared interests in growing up in the craziness of evangelicalism, which there's not a lot of people in the Boston therapy scene. At least in Boston, it's super niche. If I was in Dallas or Nashville or something like that, it wouldn't be niche at all. But being able to connect around that, and then also our shared interests in wanting to do like relational health and sexual health in Christian and post-Christian contexts as well. Like we had talked about that from the very beginning.
And so now you guys work together. Do you also have separate practices, or do you mostly work together?
A little bit of both.
A little of both, yeah.
Okay. So you meet, and then you kind of have the same niche interest within sex therapy. And now would you say that the clients that you're seeing, are they mostly folks who have deconstructed or are more like liberal Christians, or is it kind of a mix?
It's a mix. We're potentially moving more in that direction. At this stage, our licenses are in Massachusetts. So at this stage, we see primarily folks in Massachusetts, but we have a smattering of folks in Massachusetts and throughout the US that we work with who are in some variation of the deconstruction process.
But a decent amount of clients would certainly fall within that spectrum.
I'm curious, in Massachusetts, have they outlawed conversion therapy?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Not nationwide, right?
That's right. And Massachusetts was also, I think, like the 38th state to do it. They were late to the party. Little insider secret, Massachusetts, not nearly as liberal as it likes to think that it is. Its people vote left, but it can be late to some parties that you wouldn't think it would be otherwise late to.
As sex therapists and working a lot in the evangelical space, ex-evangelical space, do you see any like of the same themes pop up between clients? Is it because I imagine it feels like Groundhog Day when you see somebody, you're like,
been here.
Yeah, the two stand out to me. One would be quite similar to my experience, which is folks who get married quite young and get married for the purpose of sex, but probably won't say that they got married for the purpose of sex and have no idea, no fault of their own, how to engage sexuality, which is such a distressing experience and can be really, to some degree, embarrassing for folks. I certainly had a lot of shame around it. That would be a huge theme within sex therapy for folks in ex-evangelical types of spaces. The second would be working with couples in which the couple is deconstructing in different directions at different paces. One might be deconstructing, the other might be actually
resisting,
further entrenching themselves within religious communities. And that's a crisis for individuals. That's also a crisis for relationships. Those are two of the dominant themes that I have witnessed.
The third thing that I would say, Julia, with that is we work primarily with relationships. And as relationship therapists, like we're paying attention to how two people communicate. And a pretty consistent theme is avoidance. So Julia, those two things that you mentioned, all of those things are happening kind of behind the scenes, but also what's happening is that the two people aren't talking about it. Or if they are talking about it, they're talking about it in a way that is, no, damn it, this is what I'm going to do. In kind of this abrasive way that hyper asserts the individuality, most likely of the one who's doing the more of the deconstruction work. But part of purity culture is we don't talk about sex. And when we do talk about it, we talk about it in these like super negative types of ways. Like that carries over.
And then they're like, but if you're married, then it's all fine. You never have to talk about it because it's going to be perfect.
Exactly.
Right.
That's right. And so couples come into our offices without the skills to know how to engage conflict and how to engage conflict in a healthy way. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear around conflict. A lot of the work that we do is helping people become more comfortable with conflict and talking about who they are, what they're thinking about, and doing it in this relational kind of way.
Do you find, like, I know we don't want to make sweeping generalizations, but do you find that generally, like, having that experience of purity culture manifests differently in relationships and issues you might see for like men and women?
I do. I'm thinking about how both men and women are stuck in these double binds. So for women, they are trained to repress not just their sexuality, but really any kind of desire, any kind of want, physiologically or existentially. And then as soon as they get married, they magically turn into these like sexual goddesses, although not goddesses because of idolatry. That's a real mind fuck for a woman. And then for men, they receive the message that they are inherently sexual by nature and God made them that way. And they need to lean into it. But also you've got to like resist that because that's like the worst part of you. So that's a real mind fuck too. And when folks get married, they are navigating that all at the same time, but they might not even be aware that they are stuck in that double bind. What I have noticed, and I'd be curious about research around this, so this is purely anecdotal, I noticed that men reckon with purity culture when they see the impact on their female partners. And obviously, purity culture impacts men. I'm not minimizing that. I would never invalidate it. But women receive the massive brunt of the consequences. They are the gatekeepers to sexuality. So the burden is much higher for those who are socialized female. And men seem to finally understand or attempt to understand like the weight of that when they are then in that partnership, caught in their own double bind, seeing their partner in a double bind and realizing, oh, something as simple as waking up and getting dressed is a minefield for women, because even prepubescent girls learn that men, older men in particular, are just mentally raping them all the time. And they, as little girls, are responsible to protect themselves and to protect the men from their uncontrollable urges.
It's just no one wins in this game of like men are animalistic and men are disgusting and awful and they can't control their own urges. So women need to dress in a certain way. And I think there are so many levels to that. And we're just exploring like the cis heterosexual sort of relationships. So,
like, that's right.
Then you delve into things like, I don't know if you have a lot of queer clients, but like compulsory heterosexuality and all internalized homophobia can be, not maybe speaking from experience here, but
and also how that gets played out, how gay male couples engage with that. They engage with that in a really unique way that's a little bit different from the way that lesbian couples deal with that.
So I'm partnered with a man, but a queer woman, and also anecdotally. So there is research around sexual fluidity, particularly with those socialized female. Also anecdotally, not just with my clients, but with many people in my life, many women express more sexual or romantic interest in women following like departure from religious spaces, which was true for me and true for many of the people in my life. So I would love the research around sexual fluidity to explore sexual fluidity for those leaving high control religious spaces. I would love to see if my anecdotal experience would match sociological research.
Also, like the narrative around women not being sexual beings, like that impacts it too. Because I remember having friends that were Christian and married, and they're like, oh, no one likes sex. Like that's normal to not want to have sex with your husband. And so you're thinking, oh, if I'm not puking and physically unwell having sex and it's like just meh, then I'm probably straight.
Right. Or asexual. I thought I was
or asexual,
for like
right.
years.
Yes, that's the asexual thing I think is fascinating because you see that being played out so often in these relationships, because as a straight cis woman, I thought that I just didn't really like sex that much until I found the right men to have sex with. So it was just like, it wasn't to do with my sexuality in terms of my gender preferences,
Right.
but it was the sexuality just in terms of the specific man I was with. And did he make
Right.
me feel safe? And was I attracted to him? Because like when you're in those Christian spaces, like attraction is also something that you don't quite understand. Like
Right.
it's hard to put that into words.
It's because attraction is so linked to marriage. Attraction
Yes.
and marriage cannot be these separate things, that they're causal. One leads to the other. So there's all these like mental gymnastics that are tied to attraction.
And not just sexual attraction in general.
That's right.
Yeah. And then I think about like sexual chemistry and sexual attraction. And I remember being in younger relationships and being like, oh, well, when we're married, it'll come. Because it will. Of course it will, because God will ordain that. And God will make it happen.
But the opposite ends up happening, because in longer term relationships, attraction and eroticism are really tied together. And when we talk about eroticism, Jack Moore talks about this in the book, The Erotic Mind. This is written some time ago, but it's still a seminal work in the field, that eroticism is attraction plus obstacles. And what's really interesting is that in purity culture settings,
it's the biggest obstacle ever.
That's right. The idea of don't have sex, you're going to get punished if you have sex, you're going to get shamed if you have sex, like is so vibrant. So people are both like highly anxious around sex. And also like church camps, youth rallies are super sexually charged.
Christian college campuses in the spring before graduation, when people are getting engaged and on the brink of marriage at 20, right. Like the palpable level of sexual tension and anxiety at the same time is just.
Yeah.
When we worked at camp, the men would be really like affectionate with each other. Like
I always find that like pseudo like male erotic behavior of like wrestling and seeking out affection physically very interesting among like straight men.
But that actually gets back to the comment that I made earlier about queer men.
Yeah.
Why queer men have different challenges, because while that's happening, while straight men are both like engaging with each other, they're also controlling each other's sexuality, not by sex shaming per se, not by slut shaming, but by using, oh, well, that's so gay, don't be gay, like derogatory comments about penises, about male sexuality, about gay sexuality. So a lot of gay men who grow up in evangelical cultures are also absorbing that and may struggle then figuring out. I've worked with a handful of couples that have struggled figuring out how to navigate that unique version of sex shaming.
Yeah, and like internalized homophobia, I think, is even strong within non-Christian or non-ex-religious people. But if you add that religion factor into it,
sure.
I wonder if the internalized homophobia is even worse.
And I think it'd be hard for men in particular, because men on average tend to be more aware of their sexuality earlier. Like queer men are more likely to know that they're queer at a younger age. So to go through the awkward, confusing time of adolescence, like when I was in high school, I was like, oh, it's so easy not to have sex with the boys I'm dating. I don't even want to kiss them. Like, so it's like
Sarah loved it. She was so good at purity culture.
I was so good. I was like, why is this an issue for anyone?
I love that.
Yeah.
But that actually gets to, I think that lesbian couples can navigate religious context a little bit easier than gay couples can, because sexuality isn't something because women are taught to be asexual, right? So lesbian couples have more of kind of a broad area to base their relationships around. They're not pressured to base their relationships around sexuality in the ways that same-sex male couples are, or that straight couples are.
I have a question along those lines for you, Sarah, is that like, yes, you have or had internalized homophobia, but did people make fun of like a lesbian couple as much as gay men couples were made fun of?
No, I think it was just less visible, right? Like I think there was more talk of like Sodom and Gomorrah and like two men being together, and I think it was just not, it wasn't mentioned. It was never visible. Like I remember going to a youth retreat once and there was like an ex-gay man there, but there was never any sort of talk around that for women.
Right.
Just the same way we didn't talk about sexuality in general in the same way. Like we didn't need accountability partners for masturbation.
Right. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, Jeremiah, you probably didn't like mean it this way, but like I'm not sure like easier or harder is a necessarily the best way
that's
to
fair here. I think that gay
different
couples
challenges.
have different challenges. That's right.
Right.
Because like the invisibility is crushing.
Yeah, that's right.
So maybe there's just like a different set of challenges for
No, thanks for saying that.
other couples.
And even to this day, I feel like lesbian relationships are not as respected by straight men as they are maybe gay relationships are. Like I was just out for a date with my partner last night.
There's the fetishization.
Yeah. And we were just like chatting. We're both like straight passing women. And then these two guys came up to us. They were hitting on us like, oh, you guys want to grab a drink?
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. And this is the first time it's ever happened because, we're like in our mid-30s and we have 2 kids. And so like we don't always go out places that you would find people hitting on you. And they're just like asking about, are you guys single? And I was like, oh, actually, like that's my girlfriend. But then later, when my girlfriend like took our dog over to like have a pee, one of the guys went up to her and he's like, hey, I know you said that's your girlfriend. Like, do you want to like exchange numbers in secret? I'm like, gross. And like,
oh my God,
I know.
And that goes beyond Christian cultures. Like that's culture,
100%.
regardless of religion. The fetishization of lesbians. So
I mean, for Julia, that it must be a strange experience for you. Like I remember at a certain point I identified as bi and I was like married to a man, but like just bi erasure in general within the community and trying to navigate queer spaces when you're with a cis man.
It's really challenging because not only do I pass as straight, like I'm pretty femme. So like I wear dresses and people perceive me in a very specific kind of way. And so Jeremiah is like incredibly supportive. Like you are amazing. I don't feel like erased by you, but in these larger, broader ways, I have that experience and it's really sad. And there's a huge amount of grief around it. I had one of the most healing experiences of just this past year was reconnecting with a friend from growing up. And she is also married to a man and she is also queer. And it was really powerful to bond over what it was like to grow up in such a repressed community. We had no idea that's something we could have navigated together. I think she was far more aware of her sexuality than I was. I don't think I was quite aware in a specific way around attraction towards women, but I also wasn't aware about attraction towards anyone. And so it was healing to be able to have this conversation about what it was like to grow up and to have that part of ourselves so repressed. And then now to be in our mid-30s and partnered with men and wanting and desiring to be in queer spaces and not necessarily knowing like how to navigate that. And I'm also not the kind of person who, for me personally, it's just not my style to like make announcements about myself to like, oh, and by the way, I am queer in case you didn't know. And so there's a lot of grief wrapped up in that.
It's really interesting because that is definitely something that doesn't get talked about. And Sarah, you have mentioned bi erasure before.
Yeah.
And I guess I just didn't realize like I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes. It's like, as yes, a married woman, if I were to be queer or identify as bisexual, everyone would just be like, well, who cares? You're married to a man, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, you're right. That's so unfair.
Yeah. Even within the queer community, I feel like there is so much biphobia. Like it's unreal, the level, like the amount of women I know that are lesbians that are like, oh, I wouldn't want to date a bi woman. Actually, like my partner is like attracted to both men and women. And people just make assumptions either way about your sexuality based on who you're with. Question. So I'm curious about like, because I feel like the lack of talk about consent within purity culture and the fact that your body is a temple of God. Your body already doesn't belong to you. And then in scripture, it's like you give the authority of your body to your spouse. And you should never really say no unless you mutually decide for a really short period of time. Like that's all explicitly in there. So how do you find that sort of narrative impacts people that you've worked with?
Yeah, that's a huge one. Now, Jeremiah doesn't know this. I'm prepping for an episode for our podcast, and our summer series is called Taking a Break From. And one of the topics will be sex. And I learned that when you got married, within a Christian context, that God would bless your sexual relationship forever and ever. And your honeymoon sex would simultaneously be like your peak experience, but it would also get better and better. So not quite sure how all that works out. And the idea was that sex would always be consistent. And that for me and for many people meant you will have sex multiple times a week with your spouse, and that will happen forever. And the only time that that wouldn't happen would be like the 8 to 12 weeks after you give birth to a baby, because you are definitely going to be a mom. You're definitely going to give birth to that baby through your vagina. And the doctor will tell you that you can't have sex afterwards for a period of time. But as soon as you're cleared, you just go right back out.
Oh, God.
And with one of my clients, we're talking about the idea of sexual sabbatical, because the crushing pressure of surviving purity culture, along with a whole host of other life stressors, has made sexuality very difficult for this person to engage. And the concept of taking a step back from sexuality for a period of time was really mind-blowing for this client, and would have been mind-blowing for me. What we know as sex therapists is that people take breaks from sexuality for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes they are due to a crisis or a medical emergency. Sometimes they are because people just want to take a break. And I forget who mentioned compulsory heterosexuality, but that's a big part here. When folks come to sex therapy, I don't assume that the goal is to have more frequent sex. And so what we talk about with clients is you get to decide what role, if any, sexuality plays in your relationship. And throughout the course of a relationship, especially a long-term relationship, the relationship will have periods of more sex, less sex. The quality will be different. The type will be different. Maybe partners will be different. And it can be really, really freeing to know that you don't have to have sex 6 times a week for the rest of your life, starting at age 18 when you get married. I hope that's helpful.
It's fascinating.
How do you find that compulsory monogamy, how does that get put in there for people?
We are also working on an episode about that.
Well, so I would suggest that there is no such thing as a monogamous relationship. So here's what every relationship is: an open relationship. So here's what I mean by that. And I have, so I've gotten to become good friends with my neighbor next door. And probably once every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we'll go out for lunch. And we take our sweet time, 2.5 hours. And we talk about some really intimate stuff. We talk about our lives. We talk about politics. We talk about different elements of like male relationships, male sexuality, those types of things. And like, these are things, Julia, that I kind of discuss with you, but I get much deeper into my relationship with my neighbor. Like, everyone has versions of that, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of compulsory monogamy, Esther Perel talks about this in Mating in Captivity.
I love Esther Perel.
There's so much pressure on 20th and 21st century marriages to play all of these different roles. To play a role, sexual intimacy, emotional connection, parenting, best friends, financial, caretakers, like you do it all. Yeah. And maybe that works for some people, but for most people have elements of their relationships that they seek energy, or that they seek kind of functioning from another person that isn't their spouse. And so like recognizing that, I think, is a really important part to be beginning to break up this idea of compulsory monogamy. Esther Perel talks about this a little bit. Relationship anarchy is also a really important idea.
Can you explain that? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, relationship anarchy is this idea that a relationship can have all sorts of functions, including some of the functions that I named, also a lot of other functions too. And relationship anarchy basically gives a dyad permission to decide, hey, the function of this relationship is this. It doesn't have to be these other things. Like, the function of this relationship is just like emotional connection. Like the relationship with my neighbor, the function of that relationship is like emotional connection. And that's a really enriching like experience for me when I get to hang out with him. And you have friends that are like that as well. And relationship anarchy is the idea that you can pick the function of your relationship, and it doesn't have to be all of these different things.
Right.
And you can also make the decision as an individual, hey, you know what? Like this particular relationship actually helps me meet my goals of, let's say, like caring for my family in different ways than, say, my partner or a sibling or my neighbor or whatever. Yeah. So basically it gives people a lot of different options of thinking about all the different types of relationships that exist in their lives.
When working with ex-evangelical couples, expanding options is one of the biggest parts of our work, because folks from the backgrounds that all of us have described received really rigid scripts around gender, around sexuality, around relationships. And we actually have far more freedom than we often realize, which doesn't mean that it's easy. Negotiating relationships is wicked complicated. Yeah. However, when we think about compulsory monogamy, ultimately what you're describing, Jeremiah, is demystifying it a little bit.
That's right.
And we're not, when you guys are talking about monogamy here, we're not even just talking about sex.
Right.
And that's the idea of compulsory sexuality. Yeah. Compulsory sexuality would suggest that sexuality is like the highest, kind of most pure function of a relationship. Like that's kind of the nirvana. That's the pinnacle of a relationship. Those are the most important relationships. And that's simply not true. Your relationship, Julia, you've talked about some of your other relationships with people and saying like, this is a super important relationship for me.
Yeah, I can't even imagine like not having certain relationships in my life. Do you think my husband wants to talk about religion? He doesn't give a fuck. And so it's really nice to have all the specific people in your life to help you through all your specific things.
Right. And so part of the work that we have as sex therapists when working with folks in ex-evangelical spaces is also demystifying the importance of sexuality.
Yeah.
Sexuality is important, and it's also not the most important thing.
And its level of importance varies depending on a person, a couple, or some other like group. If the relationship exists with more than two people, it can be as important or not as important as folks decide. Yeah. Now, if people have different levels of importance, that can create some conflict that's worthwhile to engage, but that's not necessarily an inherently bad thing, because sexuality will play a different role for every single person, regardless of relationship status or relationship structure.
And will also play different roles at different stages of a person's life.
Yeah, that's true. I have a question. Who is your favorite gay couple in the Bible?
So we've done this series.
We've done like 5 different episodes.
5 different episodes. They're called like Were They Gay or Were They Queer, where we examine relationships or just specific people in the Bible, and we say, is there something a little bit queer about what they're doing together or what they're doing on their own? Like, this is interesting. So we've talked about a few different quote unquote couples. But if there's anyone you can think of that you think might be worth exploring.
I'm going to say Jesus and John.
Yeah, the disciple who he loved.
In another life, I have some fiction books that I would like to write. And one of them is about Jesus and John.
Oh, my God.
Their relationship. And like, I am not a biblical scholar. I know enough to know that sexuality, relationships looked very different. The concept of romance would be wildly different than the way that we're conceptualizing it. And so that's part of the reason that I would want to like explore, like, what if that relationship were sexual, and what if the intimacy, like he calls himself the one that Jesus loved, like what did that actually mean? And like, what kind of intimacy did they share? And was that ever sexual? That's something I think about sometimes.
I love that so much.
What about fan fiction where like Esther and Ruth met and then had a love relationship?
Wow, we have done an episode of it. Oh, I guess not Esther and Ruth. Sorry. We just talked about Esther.
We just did an episode on Esther. Maybe Esther and Queen Vashti. Maybe that happened.
Yeah.
Oh.
Queen Vashti didn't want to, she was probably killed because she didn't want to be paraded out naked in front of all the king's friends. But
fair.
Yeah, I get that.
And why did we never talk about that in youth group? Why didn't we ever like, hey, this is called like sexism and misogyny?
Because who doesn't like a story about a beauty pageant for God? Even though, interestingly, it's one of 2 books in the Bible that doesn't mention God at all.
Yeah, the Book of Esther.
I didn't know that. But beauty pageant for God. That is, that's how Christians like the story of Esther.
Yeah, how you can use your physical beauty for God.
What a concept.
What about you, Jeremiah? Who's your
Yeah, like we've got, we talk about Jesus and John quite a bit.
They're collabing on some fanfic.
I'm
Paul with someone. Put Paul with someone.
I'm trying to think about
Paul's so gay. Paul's so gay.
Paul is super gay.
There's got to be some queerness in him.
Yeah, the thorn in his side.
Yeah.
And then James spreading rumors about Paul being a little queer. Like there's so much tea in there. It's so good.
Yeah. I love drama.
Yeah.
Love some good drama.
And the Bible's so dramatic. Like when we just read through Esther, you're like, oh my God. So Haman, the guy that wanted Mordecai killed, like sharpened the pole, and then Haman got killed on the pole. Sharpened pole. Like it's like so good. Yeah. Like the Bible can be fun.
Actually a great story.
The Bible can be fun. Yes, violence is fun.
Justice is fun.
Before we wrap up, there's 2 things I want to do. We sometimes make guests ask us questions to kind of like reverse the script.
Sure.
Okay. Is there a second option?
The second option is we like to shout out like a creator in this evangelical or liberal Christian or atheist space. Someone you would like to shout out.
I mean, we should obviously first of all shout out you guys, the Sexvangelicals. And then if you guys want to shout out somebody that you like in this space,
bonus if they're queer because it's like pride, but also like they can still be queer after July 1st
because this is going to come out July 2nd.
Because we care about queer creators all year round here.
Yeah.
only the month of Pride. Okay, so when Jeremiah was talking about like important people in my life, I have a very close friend. We leave each other like 45-minute voice memos, no joke.
This is the friend I was thinking of.
And we talk about how much we love friendship and how, what's so frustrating in like culture and society is this idea that like romantic relationships, particularly between like men and women, are like the highest, on top of the hierarchy of relationships. And I just love friendships, and I especially love friendships between women. So like, what is the favorite part of your friendship?
Oh, good question.
Oh, you know what my favorite part is? I'm going to go first. I'm just going to take the spotlight here. Is that Sarah and I have such a low maintenance friendship. Like we haven't lived in the same city since we graduated high school in 2008, we have lived in the same city maybe 2 years? 1 or 2 years. 2 years.
Yeah.
And so it's been a really long time. And we have remained friends. We have been playing Scrabble, I swear to God, on our phones for like 5 years, at least 5 years straight.
Amazing.
We started maybe in 2018. And so that is also another favorite part of the friendship is that we play Scrabble every day. So I would say like the low maintenance part of it, but also like it's almost like so effortless to be friends with Sarah.
Well, when someone's like known you through like so many phases of your life and been through so much of it, and now it's cool to be going through things like motherhood in parallel too, right? Because like you can understand each other on a different level. It's so easy, and then it's been so fun. Like I think one of my favorite things is that we actually like made this podcast.
Yeah, of course.
Despite like distance and
despite how busy we actually both are, and how easy it would be to just stop because religious trauma is difficult. Obviously the podcast is my favorite thing we've ever done.
And just the thing, like I think what you bring, the things that our relationships bring that like my romantic relationship doesn't bring, it's like the weird rabbit holes.
The weird
religion and the
talking about space. We like to smoke weed together and just talk about weird stuff.
I love that.
Documentaries, like
that's amazing.
Philosophy.
Yeah. Philosophy is a big one. Yeah.
Which my question, so speaking of I've got 4 or 5 floating around, but speaking of documentaries, which cult documentary, especially one that has been kind of adjacent to religious spaces, has been the best?
Okay, I have 2 answers.
Jessica's our cult girl.
I have a bit of a cult obsession. And now the cult obsession has gone down a bit since we started the podcast. This one doesn't have to do with religion, but I just got to shout out NXIVM.
NXIVM.
I was going to answer that too. Yeah.
Oh, I love
the NXIVM.
God.
So good.
So good.
Vow was and NXIVM is probably my favorite cult. I got to say, Keith Raniere, he's the biggest piece of garbage, but my God, he can create a cult that's very entertaining.
Oh yeah. The Vow is so good.
So good, yeah.
What I think the thing I love most about The Vow is that he's in prison for life. So that's probably why I love it so much. But oh my gosh, there's just so many. Keep, Sweet, Pray, and Obey.
Yeah.
I watched that one disturbing. Yeah.
Oh, Heaven's Gate is mine. Like, I find Heaven's Gate so fascinating.
We both just watched the 7M/TikTok dance cult documentary on Netflix.
Oh, write it down.
Oh, you haven't watched that one. So it's called Dancing for the Devil. We're going to be talking about it on a bonus episode soon.
Oh my
because
gosh.
It is Christian related.
Yeah.
The documentary doesn't dive into the theology very much, which is totally fine. They talk about the victims.
But like the excommunication and
I didn't even know that cult existed.
Oh, yeah. It's a new one. It's still ongoing.
TikTok
Dance cult.
It's a TikTok Christian dance cult.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain. You know what? You need to just watch it.
Let's watch it.
I'll watch the trailer. Yeah.
But yes, it is like there's Christianity, there's TikTok dancing, there's really dangerous theology, like the fear of hell, like the whole thing. But there's just so many religious cult documentaries.
It's millennial self-care.
Absolutely.
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I mean, they all have the same formula, all of these cults.
Twin Flames. Oh, Twin Flames was good.
Oh, yeah. Twin Flames is messed up. Yeah.
I was really into Twin Flames for a while too. There was a podcast on it, and then I watched a documentary, and then I joined the Facebook group because Facebook group's fucking unhinged. I wouldn't recommend. I had to leave it because I was like, these people are insane.
Did you find your twin flame?
No,
that is
You
brilliant.
joined the official Twin Flames Facebook group.
it's like the more public one, so they kind of let anybody in. But you can join it. It's the craziest shit you've ever read in your life. You're like, oh, these people are unwell. There's a lot of unwell people in there. Yeah, Twin Flames was wild. Jeff thinking that he's the second coming of Jesus. Jeff.
Oh, yeah.
They're.
Oh my god.
They're
I mean, it's the same formula. Like, I just want to say about cults, like, and this goes for this TikTok dance cult. You'll find out. But if 1,000 people are screaming at you that you're in a cult, you're in a cult. Like, I'm so sorry. And then all the people that are in it are like, I'm not in a cult. If you have to keep defending the thing that you're doing, saying that it's not a cult, that's like the only thing you need to know is that you are in a cult. It's just so
right.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I know. And then there's like the Moonies. Have you heard of the Moonies?
Oh, yeah, the Moonies.
I have a good friend whose parents grew up in the Moonies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
We actually talk about this on our podcast in one of our episodes. So yeah.
That's a really wild one. They're still going, and they got like political influence. There's a book called Combating Cult Mind Control by Stephen Hassan.
Know him. Yeah.
You know him?
Not personally, know of him.
Oh, I was like,
You're like, can you get him on our podcast?
Jessica, you just had an orgasm there. You okay?
Although pretty sure he's Boston based or was.
He was Boston based.
So I probably could get him.
Yeah.
His book is wonderful, and he was part of the Moonies. So yeah, his book is really good. You can go on his website, and he has all the characteristics of cults, and they all just fall in so neatly into these characteristics. You're just like, oh my god, like I don't understand. Like at this point in my life, I'm too tired to be enticed into a cult. I could see, it happened when I was younger.
But you're enticing to MLMs potentially.
Yeah.
MLMs.
MLMs are their own.
Because you are the person that needs a business opportunity.
Yeah. I really need a business opportunity. Okay. Yeah. I need to work from home and have financial freedom.
Okay. Talking about like one last story on purity culture. Someone when I was like, I kid you not, within like a week postpartum, one of those MLM people that was a former coworker messaged me on Facebook and was like, hey, hon, how you doing? Congrats on the new baby. And then getting into so you're probably like not liking the way your body is right now. You should try these wraps. Like, and I was like,
women are like the fun agents of misogyny.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
You're like, you're fat. Like,
yeah, like
I'm in a diaper. Okay. This is not.
Yeah, like I was literally like, I'm wearing Depends right now
because I just had like a massive physical trauma.
Yeah.
So shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
I love God. I haven't talked about cults in a while. I get really excited, and so
I get it.
I'm glad that we could experience that with you.
Yeah. And now I have like a good new cult documentary to listen to.
Yes.
Oh, it's so good.
It's really fascinating. I think the most fascinating part is that it's ongoing, and there's been no justice.
Oh, now I'm like sleuthing on all their Instagrams, and it's
no, Sarah.
Nice.
She got a little obsessed.
Yeah.
All right.
So share where people can find you, all your things, and then somebody else that you're like, they're really cool too.
So you can find us online at sexvangelicals.com. You can also listen to our podcast anywhere you want to listen to podcasts. We also have a Substack, sexvangelicals.substack.com. We send out 3 articles each week about the relationship and sexual health that the church didn't want you to have. And we're also on Instagram.
Let's shout out Nikki Pappas.
Yeah.
So Nikki Pappas has a podcast called Broadening the Narrative. She co-wrote the book Becoming Egalitarian with her husband, Stephen Pappas, and they were guests on our podcast. And Nikki also talks about her experience around queerness and how she has negotiated that in her partnership.
Cool.
All right.
So on theme with some of what we were discussing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why they came to mind.
And we'll include their stuff in the show notes because Jessica will remember.
I might remember. Yeah. And thank you guys so much for your time.
It was delightful.
Yeah.
I love your podcast. I really, really enjoy it.
Awesome.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
know you care.